There's something about that virus that affects people's autonomic nervous system.
I woke up in the middle of the night with a heart rate of 180 beats per minute. Just shot out of bed. Barely made it to my sister's bedroom because I almost passed out. And I just looked at her and I was like, you need to call 911.
And it was scary, you know, when your sister is literally in your arms on the ground telling you that she doesn't think she's gonna make it to the hospital in the next 10 minutes. It's terrifying. I think she ended up going to the ER 5 times in California in the span of like 10 days.
I'm seeing for the first time since the pandemic, people saying they got dysautonomia from having COVID.
There's a huge increase in referrals to our clinic after pandemic.
I'm Morgana. I'm a humanitarian, photographer, and filmmaker. And this is my husband, Jaco. He's a helicopter pilot. In 2014, we were living in Liberia, West Africa, when the world's largest Ebola outbreak erupted. I helped PCI Media share Ebola survivor stories through radio, TV, and social media, reaching nearly 10 million people. It helped curb the spread of the virus by driving changes in attitudes and behaviors. I saw the impact the storytelling had on communities in the middle of the outbreak. So when COVID-19 started spreading where we lived in 2020, we began documenting and sharing stories of COVID-19 survivors in New York to spread awareness about the disease. But we decided that wasn't enough. We wanted to show how COVID-19 is impacting people across America. So we moved out of our New York apartment and we moved into a 19-foot trailer so we could document COVID-19 survivors in all 50 states in America. As we interviewed more COVID-19 survivors across the United States, we began to see a pattern of symptoms related to the autonomic nervous system, like an extremely high or an extremely low heart rate, for no clear reason. But no one could explain why. Doctors often dismissed these patients as having high anxiety and prescribed medication, but their symptoms persisted. No one we talked to, at first, had a diagnosis for these ongoing, often life-altering symptoms until we met 2 sisters, one in Oregon and one in California, who had symptoms for months, until one finally got a diagnosis. That's how we first learned about something called dysautonomia.
You know, having autoimmune disease, I knew it would be longer than 2 weeks just because everything I catch is longer than that. I've been dealing with COVID-related symptoms just shy of a year, so pretty solidly for 11 months since I first caught it around March 10th. I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis in 2019. Hashimoto's is an autoimmune condition that basically creates autoantibodies that attack your thyroid and causes hypothyroidism. So your body runs a little slow. Major symptoms include fatigue, constipation, irritable bowel syndrome, dry skin, and just like generally lethargic. I think even before we knew it was spreading in California, I was on edge. So, you know, I was taking certain precautions knowing that my recent history and having an autoimmune disease and just, you know, in March 2020, there was a lot of unknowns. I'm pretty sure I caught it the week of we went into lockdown. They were not the traditional symptoms that at the time people were looking for. I never had a fever. I had a little bit of a cough, but nothing too severe. And a lot of digestion issues was probably the primary thing that I felt. I was feeling fatigued and tired and assumed that a lot of that was from being at home and not working at an ergonomically friendly desk. And just stress, right? This global pandemic was exploding everywhere. Chronic fatigue started setting in pretty quickly. Even though my doctor had told me I was fighting a viral infection, I couldn't get tested. So it took about a month before I could get a PCR test. And by that time, I had cleared the virus, and a lot of other symptoms had emerged. But my little sister, Wyatt, had also caught it.
When Wyatt caught COVID, she was dealing with a reactivation of Epstein-Barr, otherwise known as mono. But she didn't know that she also had hypermobility Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or EDS, an inherited connective tissue disorder which may have contributed to her body's extreme response to COVID.
When I realized that it was a more serious situation for me was when I woke up in the middle of the night with a heart rate of 180 beats per minute. Just shot out of bed, barely made it to my sister's bedroom because I almost passed out. And I just looked at her and I was like, you need to call 911.
And it was scary, you know, when your sister is literally in your arms on the ground telling you that she doesn't think she's gonna make it to the hospital in the next 10 minutes. It's terrifying.
And they had to stop my heart 3 times.
Every time she was falling asleep, her system was kicking in that she couldn't breathe, and she thought she was gonna die. So her anxiety was through the roof.
It was especially scary because you're having to sit there and convince practitioners that something is wrong with you and that you need help. And essentially they're like, well, there's nothing else we can do for you. So I had a lot of doctors telling me that it was just anxiety or something that just happens to people.
We decided that the best case was not to hospitalize her. We had gone down exploring the path of like actually having her go to a mental health institution for a few days because like the anxiety was so bad, and they wouldn't take her through the ER, even though she had gone, I think she ended up going to the ER 5 times in California. In the span of like 10 days. We finally decided to try to drive to Oregon. But once we were in Portland, we lived for 3 weeks in the back of my parents' house, totally separated, covered the air vents, only talked to them through the glass door outside on the porch, and they did all of the cooking for us. And meanwhile, my sister was still going to the hospital every few days. So we had a lot of ambulance rides, a lot of taking work phone calls in parking lots, waiting to hear.
I was bedridden for probably about 4 months and like would have to crawl to the bathroom because every time I stood, my heart rate would just spike and it would feel like I was having a heart attack. It required a lot of me just trusting that I would be okay when everything in my body was telling me like, the alarms are on, something's not right.
Who figured out that you had dysautonomia?
I'm really lucky. I landed myself a doctor who works with people who have chronic viral infections. So she had officially confirmed it. And then just based off of my own research, I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely what I have going on.
The word dysautonomia kept coming up in conversations with survivors on and off the camera, but we still didn't understand it. And then we met Melissa, who started to put the puzzle pieces together for us. Melissa is a COVID survivor, but she was diagnosed with dysautonomia long before that.
To give you an idea of what Melissa's had to go through just to prepare for the interview today, I'm going to read you a couple of her emails. My reluctance about 5:30 a.m. is that I spend the first 2 to 4 hours after I get up from lying down several hours in bed, stabilizing my perpetually unstable blood pressure. With my dysautonomia, it roller coasters dangerously high and also so low that I pass out if I'm not on oxygen. I stabilize it each morning by drinking 32 ounces of coffee. Caffeine constricts the blood vessels. 32 ounces of electrolyte drinks to plump up my blood volume, all while slowly pedaling on a bike pedal exerciser to keep my blood circulating and using my oxygen machine to keep my oxygen levels up. If I try to skip the process, my blood pressure becomes extremely unstable. It can reach dangerous levels by midday, which can leave me bedridden for a few days. Been there, done that. It's a tight wire I walk every morning. Anyway, that's my early morning dilemma. She's the second person we've talked to who has had to go to extra lengths just to be able to be prepared for the interview. They so want to share their story that they're willing to do nothing for a day or 2 days before so that they can save their energy levels so that they can even speak to us. I mean, that's a huge honor, and I'll be honest, I feel bad about it. I feel guilty, but it is. I'm not forcing them to do it. It is their choice.
Dysautonomia is a disorder of the autonomic nervous system. And your autonomic nervous system is that part of your nervous system that does things automatically. It's regulating your blood pressure, it's regulating your body temperature, it's regulating your heart rate. When you eat, it regulates your digestion, it regulates your hormones, your electrolytes. It calls the shots for all those things that you don't have to stop and think about. I know a little bit about it only because I've had it for 21 years at least. That's my mobility scooter over there with the printer. I'll show you it. So when we go places like Home Depot, which are distances greater than I can walk, because I can't exert myself that much. I didn't have symptoms bad enough till I was 40 years old and went without a diagnosis. For 12 years, it got worse and worse and worse. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I knew it was real. When I first started having symptoms, all I knew was I was dizzy. I was having dizzy spells. I was getting nauseated. My heart was beating really, really fast. What is happening? And those are such vague symptoms. Oftentimes doctors, especially if they haven't been to medical school recently, I'm not being ageist, I'm in my 60s. Somebody my age who went to medical school way back in the days when I went to law school, they weren't taught about dysautonomia. They don't know. The newer doctors, I think, do. And the specialists do. I've had the same GP for 18 years and he never gave up trying to find out what was wrong with me. And he kept sending me to specialist after specialist after specialist for 12 years. And finally, we lucked out. He sent me to a new specialist who moved from New York, who knew all about how the autonomic nervous system affects the circulatory system, which is what dysautonomia is. And he recognized what I had within a few minutes of talking to me. For people that develop dysautonomia, I am an example of the most common problem is the destabilization of the blood pressure. My blood pressure can't be regulated anymore. Now, for many people, it only drops low, but for some of us, it also goes too high. So there are certain body positions and certain triggers. Some are food, some are air temperature, certain triggers that will cause our blood pressures to plummet to where we pass out, we lose consciousness. Because when your blood pressure drops, your oxygen gets dragged down with it. And also our blood pressure shoots up, and it can shoot up to dangerous levels where you might have a stroke or have organ damage. And in keeping with that, it also sends even a healthy heart bad, incorrect messages. Autonomic nervous system that's malfunctioning can tell your heart that's otherwise healthy to beat too quickly. It can tell it to slow down too slow. I was homebound for 5 years up until recently when I got the supplemental oxygen that now, as long as I'm on it, keeps me from passing out. Dysautonomia can be very disruptive to one's living a normal life. So it can be a pretty serious disease.
After talking with Laura, Wyatt, and Melissa, we were even more curious about dysautonomia, and we wanted to speak to an expert who could explain it more. So we reached out to Dr. Chung, who started a clinic for POTS, a form of dysautonomia at Johns Hopkins, and conducts research on the syndrome.
So how did you get into studying and treating dysautonomia or POTS to begin with?
So when I first joined Johns Hopkins, I was very interested in muscle diseases, and I was in the muscle disease clinic. And when I saw muscle disease patients, among those people, I've seen group of these people who complain pretty weird and various muscle symptoms and severe exercise intolerance. And I did a little more research into it and found that their symptoms are related to autonomic nervous system. And I was really fascinated by the fact that autonomic nervous system can cause severe muscle symptoms like that. And at the same time, these people, their symptoms have been dismissed by other doctors, and there are not really many other clinics that I can send the patients to anyways. So I felt like I had to start the clinic. POTS is a form of dysautonomia. POTS refers to postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and it is technically defined by heart rate increase by 30 to 40 points from lying to standing position. And at the same time, it has to reproduce their typical symptoms of chronic fatigue, brain fog, palpitation, anxiety, and various gastrointestinal symptoms.
And what, outside of COVID, what typically causes dysautonomia?
A lot of people suffer from dysautonomia as a part of neurodegenerative process. Basically, it's kind of facilitated aging in a certain aspects of their nervous system. So yeah, there are some genetic cause of autonomic neuropathy that's known. It can cause various types of neuropathy affecting autonomic nervous system and sensory nervous system, depending on what kind of gene mutations they have. It can be caused by infection as well, or it can be caused by virus, but not the virus or bacteria directly affecting the autonomic nervous system. After its recovery, it can cause some autoimmune attack to the autonomic nervous system, causing various symptoms.
There is currently no treatment for dysautonomia. They can give you drugs designed for other disorders, and it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. Maybe it'll help you, maybe it won't. But there's no medicine for dysautonomia. But up until COVID, it didn't happen to enough people that there's been a lot of interest in medical research. Dysautonomia research is in its infancy, and I would liken it to this. Having dysautonomia in 2021 would be like having diabetes in 1921. In 1921, if you had diabetes, they knew enough to identify it, but there was no known medicine at that time. There was no known recommendations for lifestyle changes or eating. You were just kind of left to your own devices. And that's where we are with dysautonomia. You're left to your own devices. So that's where the support groups are good, because everything I've learned has been through trial and error and talking to other people who've done the same, and we give each other tips. Oh, I forgot I got rid of my SWAT team one because this original model that I had in white kept me cooler.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a Texas cool vest.
Nice.
And to set it up, I just turn it inside out. Oh, good. I had worn this one yet. I forgot I bought it in the last one. So that is a cooling vest, and they're adjustable, so you can bring them in. They don't look the greatest, but boy, they keep you cool. So, and the difference between being able to be outside and participate in games or not be outside at all. I'm in various dysautonomia support groups online, have been for years. At this point, I'm just in there to help what we call the newbies, newly diagnosed people. We give them day-to-day tips for managing it, like oxygen helps, cooling vests help, heated jackets help, those kind of things. I'm seeing for the first time since the pandemic, people saying they got dysautonomia from having COVID and joining the groups because of that.
Are you seeing an increase in patients at your clinic since the onset of the pandemic?
Absolutely, yes. There's a huge increase in referral to our clinic after pandemic, and it's not just Hopkins.
What's the wait time to get into your clinic right now?
We are like growing, like I think I have like 10, 11 months right now, which is a problematic because these people have very disabling symptoms. As you probably know, like immune system is there in our body to protect ourselves from virus or bacteria or foreign bodies. But sometimes our immune systems can get confused and recognize our own body tissue as some kind of virus or bacteria and continuously attack and inflame the body tissue. So it can cause different type of disease depending on which organ they attack. But basically what may be happening in post-COVID syndrome patients is that possibly these people who get post-COVID syndrome, their nervous system's molecular structures may look very similar to the molecular structure of COVID virus itself. So what happens is that their immune system, they develop a thing called antibody. That's one of the weapons of our immune system to get rid of the COVID virus. But even after virus is gone out of their body, the antibodies still recognize our body tissue. In that case, the nervous system, autonomic nervous system, and continuously attack and inflame the nervous system. And the thought is that that's why they develop post-COVID, long COVID syndrome. In the case of dysautonomia and post-COVID syndrome, the growing suspicion is that it's attacking autonomic nervous system that particularly regulates our blood flows.
And in the patients that you're seeing, did they have extreme cases of COVID or mild cases of COVID, or does it vary?
Yeah, most of them had mild or asymptomatic cases of COVID infection before they developed long COVID syndrome. One of the statistics shows that just about 90% of these people who develop long COVID syndrome only have mild cases of COVID infection.
Do you have any idea how many of the patients you're seeing now who had COVID and have developed dysautonomia also had some form of pre-existing condition, especially an autoimmune disease?
Yes, that's actually a very interesting and important question that I may not have the best answers for, to be honest, at this point. So we know that POTS or dysautonomia, there are a lot of overlapping syndromes, such as Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue condition that presents with flexible joints, pale skin, and hypermobile joints. And also mast cell activation syndrome. These people develop some kind of allergy-like symptoms. And overall speaking, most of my patients in my POTS clinic, they are predominantly female in their usually 20s and 30s. And that's not just my POTS clinic. Actually, a lot of other clinics who see the similar patients see the same pattern. And we are beginning to see this similar pattern in post-COVID POTS patients as well, predominantly more female. And a lot of them actually have some pre-existing conditions, EDS, mast cell activation syndrome, and some autoimmune disorders like Hashimoto disease, thyroiditis in the past. So we believe that there may be some genetic predisposition that make them more vulnerable to get dysautonomia or POTS after COVID infection. I think there are a few different research projects that's involved in post-COVID and POTS and dysautonomia. But one of the most important and urgent projects that I'm involved in is to prove autoimmunity in post-COVID syndrome and POTS, because there's actually some practical and important implication of those research. If you can prove that this is autoimmune disease, that really opens up the possibility of using certain immunomodulating therapy or immunosuppressive drugs. And oftentimes these drugs are very expensive. So through research, we can eventually make insurance companies to pay for these expensive treatments to get them better.
Do you think that this is a permanent condition for these patients, or do you think that this is a phase that they'll grow out of?
I think this is probably a permanent condition, especially if this is autoimmune disease. There's really no reason to think that it's going to go away. As you probably know, our immune system has such thing as immune memory. Once our immune system memorize certain molecular pattern, it doesn't go away. Just like you get the vaccine, you're not gonna get the same disease for the rest of your life. So that's the same as autoimmune condition. It's gonna probably stay for a very long time.
So I'm in my 10th month, I think, rounding up on a year soon. It's torturous because every day kind of feels like its own limbo. You're just stuck in this body that isn't functioning properly. And that's definitely been a big mental shift of just having to reorient ourselves to the reality of our timelines. I think has definitely been probably one of the more difficult things about all of this. Finding the balance between like hope and acceptance of your current reality. I am having a difficult time continuing to trust that I will get better and that this is not my forever. However, like I've been able to access joy in ways that I haven't been able to in very simple ways. Like just looking at the shadows on my wall or the trees in the wind. And so I think that's kind of been one of the blessings in all of this is I was so stripped down in what I was able to do that I had to get really creative in the ways that like I accessed joy for myself that weren't distractions like TV or things that I thought brought me joy, right? So I do believe healing is possible. I'll get there. That this won't be like my everyday existence.
One thing we've learned through the process of making this film is that there is an ongoing discussion within the medical field about dysautonomia. And we certainly are not the experts. We are just storytellers sharing stories as they have been told to us. We have talked with dozens of COVID-19 survivors with bizarre symptoms related to their autonomic nervous system. And this was the first time we heard a diagnosis for one of them. But access to specialists like Dr. Chung is rare and hard to find. For patients in states with experts who can help, the wait time is often painfully long. But if you're in a more remote location, there's often no option at all. That's what Kelsey struggled with. We travel all the way to Alaska to hear her story next.
If Alaska were a country, it would be the nation with the world's highest per capita case rate. Basically, that means there's no room at the hospital.
We dropped the rig off with my mom in outside of Seattle and left our cat with her, and she started feeling sick on Monday. Hey, we have a COVID testing appointment at 3 o'clock.
So this is a self-administered test that you guys will do in your car.
So I've experienced COVID-related symptoms for 317 days. It's been the hardest year of my life for sure, is not knowing and still not knowing and trying to figure out, is it COVID? I know that COVID had something to do with it, but is that just it?
Hey, thank you for watching. If you've liked this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, as this helps the YouTube algorithm share this video with others.
Right now we're planning to release 12 episodes, one a week for 12 weeks. But we have a lot more content than that. And if we can get additional funding, then we can keep going and we can share more stories.
So if you've liked this video, please consider becoming a Patreon member, as this helps us share stories with others. You can follow the link in the description below. Thank you again for watching, and please tune in next Thursday for the next episode.